Sonny Liston didn't answer. That's the part nobody talks about. Everyone remembers what Cassius Clay said, "The ring is right there, let's find out right now." But the part that mattered was what Sonny Liston did next. Nothing. The most feared man in boxing, the heavyweight champion of the world, the man who destroyed every opponent he'd ever faced, stood at that podium in Miami Beach in January 1964 in front of 3,000 people and said nothing for 5 seconds. 10 seconds, long enough for 3,000 people to notice, long enough for the silence to say everything that Liston's words couldn't, long enough for a 22-year-old Cassius Clay, sitting in the front row after Liston had just told the crowd he couldn't fight, to let a slow smile spread across his face. Clay looked around at the 3,000 people watching this moment, then back at Liston, and said 5 words, "That's what I thought." The room erupted, not with laughter, with the specific kind of electric energy that happens when you witness something historic, when you feel the balance of power shifting in real time. And 6 weeks later, when Cassius Clay knocked out Sonny Liston in the 7th round and became the heavyweight champion of the world, everyone who'd been in that room remembered the silence, because the fight had already been decided in that Miami Beach hotel ballroom. 3,000 witnesses, no punches thrown. January 1964, Miami Beach, Florida. The heavyweight championship fight between Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay was scheduled for February 25th, 6 weeks away. Every major boxing writer in America had traveled to Miami to cover what most of them believed would be a brief, brutal fight, followed by the end of Cassius Clay's career. The numbers told a simple story. Liston was 35 years old, the undisputed heavyweight champion, undefeated in his professional career, with 35 wins and 0 losses. He'd knocked out Floyd Patterson twice, both times in the first round, both fights lasting less than 3 minutes combined. He'd destroyed former champions, top contenders, and every serious heavyweight who'd been brave enough to face him. His punch had been measured at a force that could crack engine blocks. His reach of 84 inches was longer than most men were tall. His fists were so large that the Boxing Commission had struggled to find gloves that fit properly. Cassius Clay was 22 years old. He was undefeated at 19-0, but the boxing establishment didn't take that record seriously. They felt Clay hadn't fought anyone who could prepare him for Liston. Clay was fast, certainly. He had reflexes that bordered on supernatural. He was smart, creative, and had an ability to read opponents that was unusual for someone his age. But Liston had heard all about fast fighters before. He'd heard about clever fighters, skilled fighters, talented fighters. He'd knocked them all out. Speed and skill didn't help when you were unconscious on the canvas. The betting odds reflected this near-universal assessment. Clay was a 7-to-1 underdog, 7-to-1, meaning that for every $7 you bet on Liston, you'd win $1 if Clay somehow managed to win. The smart money, essentially all of it, was on Liston. Several Las Vegas casinos had stopped taking bets on the fight entirely because they couldn't balance their books. Too much money was coming in on Liston, not enough on Clay. Making the situation more desperate for Clay was the fact that almost nobody in his corner truly believed he could win. His promoters were worried. Members of his own team had privately expressed doubts. Several of his cornermen had taken out insurance policies against the possibility that Clay might get seriously hurt. The Louisville sponsoring group that backed Clay financially was having quiet conversations about what would happen to their investment if Liston hurt him badly enough to end his career. Clay himself appeared to be the only person in the world who genuinely believed Cassius Clay could beat Sonny Liston. On the morning of January 14, 1964, a press luncheon was held at the Americana Hotel in Miami Beach. 3,000 people attended. Boxing writers, promoters, former champions, local celebrities, and fans who'd paid for the privilege of seeing both fighters up close before the big fight. It was supposed to be a routine media event, both fighters saying predictable things about the upcoming bout, photographers getting their shots, writers getting their quotes, everyone going home with enough material to fill their columns.
Liston arrived first, commanding the room the way he always did, through sheer physical presence and the crushing weight of his reputation. He was enormous, serious, and utterly confident in the specific way that men become confident when they've never truly lost at anything that mattered. He sat at the head table and answered questions from journalists with short, direct answers that required no elaboration. When the subject of Cassius Clay came up, Liston's demeanor shifted from confident to contemptuous. He'd grown genuinely irritated with Clay over the previous weeks. Clay had been showing up at Liston's training sessions uninvited, shouting insults, disrupting workouts. Clay had driven a bus to Liston's house at 2 a.m., honking the horn. Clay had been on the radio, on television, in newspapers every single day, making noise and predictions and generally making everyone's lives more complicated. Most fighters tried to intimidate Liston through silence and sighs. Clay was trying to do it through relentless chaos, and Liston found it more annoying than threatening. Liston picked up the microphone and turned to face the crowd of 3,000 directly. "Cassius Clay cannot fight," Liston said, his deep voice filling the ballroom without visible effort. "He has never faced a real fighter in his life. Every man he's beaten has been a stepping stone, good enough to build a record on paper, not good enough to prepare him for what's coming. I've watched him train, I've seen what he can do, and I'm telling every one of you right now that when that boy steps into the ring with me on February 25th, the whole world is going to see the truth. Cassius Clay cannot fight." The crowd responded exactly as Liston expected. Nods of agreement, murmurs of assent, appreciative laughter, several reporters scribbling down the quote, former champions at the head table nodding along. This was the consensus view, stated plainly and confidently by the man best positioned to know it. What Liston didn't know was that Cassius Clay was sitting in the front row. Clay had arrived quietly, slipping into a seat near the front before the event began, wearing a simple suit, none of the theatrical showmanship he usually performed for cameras. He'd been sitting there the entire time, listening. When Liston started speaking about him, Clay didn't react, didn't stand up, didn't perform for the crowd. He just listened. His face showed nothing. When Liston finished his declaration, "Cassius Clay cannot fight," and the crowd murmured its agreement, Clay let the moment sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said quietly, just one word, "Sonny." The room went silent faster than should have been physically possible. Something about the way Clay said it, not loud, not theatrical, just calm and direct, cut through the noise like a blade. Liston turned toward the voice, and his expression shifted when he saw who it was. For just a fraction of a second, so brief that most people in the room would later debate whether they'd actually seen it, something moved behind Liston's eyes. Not fear, not quite, but recognition. Clay stood up from his seat. He straightened his jacket, took a slow breath, and looked at Liston with an expression that nobody in the room had ever seen on the face of anyone facing Sonny Liston. Absolute certainty. "You say I can't fight," Clay said. His voice was still calm, conversational almost, but it carried through the entire ballroom the way quiet voices do when every other sound has disappeared. "There's a ring set up right in the corner of this room. I can see it from here. You can see it from there." Clay pointed toward the practice ring that had been set up at the far end of the ballroom for demonstration purposes. "Let's find out right now, in front of all these people. Let's settle it today and save everyone the 6 weeks of waiting." The silence that followed was unlike anything most people in that room had ever experienced. 3,000 people simultaneously held their breath, the kind of silence that has physical weight that you can feel pressing against your eardrums.
Sonny Liston stared at Cassius Clay. Clay stared back at Sonny Liston. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The journalists stopped writing. The photographers stopped shooting. The former champions at the head table stopped nodding. Everyone in that ballroom became very still, watching two men look at each other across a hotel ballroom and feeling, without being able to articulate it, that something enormous was happening. Liston said nothing. He was the heavyweight champion of the world. He was the most feared man in boxing. He had never, in his professional life, backed down from anyone or anything. He'd fought his way up from poverty and prison to become the undisputed master of his sport. He was 11 years older than Clay, 30 pounds heavier, and possessed of a punch that had ended careers with a single blow. And he said nothing. Later, boxing historians would spend considerable time analyzing what went through Liston's mind in those 10 seconds of silence. Some argued that he was simply processing the social dynamics. He couldn't actually fight Clay in a hotel ballroom 6 weeks before their scheduled bout. Some argued that Liston recognized at some deep instinctive level what the rest of the boxing world had missed, that Clay's calmness in this moment was more dangerous than any amount of noise. Some argued that Sonny Liston, standing at that podium with 3,000 people watching, simply couldn't find an answer. After perhaps 12 seconds, which felt like 12 minutes, Cassius Clay did something that nobody expected. He smiled. Not the wide, performative smile he showed the cameras, a quieter smile, private almost, meant just for Liston. Then he said, still quietly, 5 words. "That's what I thought." The ballroom erupted. 3,000 people, some laughing, some applauding, some simply releasing the tension they'd been holding, all reacting simultaneously to what they'd just witnessed. Liston's face went very still. He set down the microphone carefully and said nothing further on the subject of Cassius Clay's ability to fight. The press luncheon ended shortly afterward. Reporters immediately began calling their editors. This exchange, Clay's challenge and Liston's silence, was the real story of the day, and every journalist in that room knew it. Word spread quickly through boxing circles. By the next morning, every major newspaper in the country was running the story. Clay challenges Liston on the spot. Liston silent after Clay's dare. Clay issues public challenge. Liston doesn't answer. The headlines all captured the same essential truth. In a hotel ballroom, in front of 3,000 people, Cassius Clay had issued a direct challenge to the heavyweight champion of the world and received silence in return.
The psychological impact on the upcoming fight was immeasurable, though difficult to quantify in the moment. Fighters, trainers, and boxing writers began quietly revisiting their assessments. Not their public predictions, most of them still publicly picked Liston, some by wide margins, but their private calculations began to shift in ways they couldn't fully explain. Because Sonny Liston didn't do silence. In 15 years of professional boxing, Sonny Liston had never been at a loss for how to handle a confrontation. He handled them with his fists, with his stare, with the sheer weight of his reputation. He didn't stand at podiums saying nothing. Something about watching him stand there, wordless, in response to a 22-year-old kid's direct challenge, had planted a seed of doubt that nobody could quite root out, no matter how much they tried to explain it away. Liston's camp did try to explain it away. They said their fighter had simply chosen not to dignify the provocation, that a champion of Liston's stature didn't need to respond to circus performances. The explanation was technically reasonable, but it didn't land the way it should have, because everyone who'd been in that room had felt what they'd felt, and explanations couldn't undo feelings. You couldn't logic your way out of something you'd experienced in your body. That strange shift, that transfer of weight, those 12 seconds of silence from the most feared man in boxing. 6 weeks later, on February 25, 1964, at Convention Hall in Miami Beach, Cassius Clay won the heavyweight championship of the world when Sonny Liston refused to come out for the 7th round, sitting on his stool in the corner, his shoulder injured, his spirit broken by 6 rounds of facing a man who was faster, smarter, and more prepared than anything Liston had encountered in his entire professional career.
Clay ran around the ring screaming at the press rows, his voice raw with something bigger than victory. "I am the greatest! I shook up the world! I am the king! I am the greatest thing that ever lived! I must be the greatest! I showed the world! I talk to God every day! I'm the king of the world!" The reporters who'd been at that press luncheon 6 weeks earlier heard something different beneath the celebration. They heard the echo of a quieter voice in a hotel ballroom saying simply, "That's what I thought." The fight in the ring had lasted 6 rounds. The real fight, the one that determined how this story would end, had lasted 12 seconds of silence in the Americana Hotel ballroom, 3,000 witnesses, no punches thrown, a 22-year-old kid and the most feared man in boxing staring at each other across a room until one of them blinked. Cassius Clay blinked last, and the rest is history. If this story of silence and certainty moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that confidence doesn't always need to be loud. Have you ever watched someone win a confrontation without saying a word? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the moments when silence speaks louder than words.